Well, hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Dream Big podcast with Bob Goff and friends. I'm Scott Schimmel, and I'm here 6 feet away with Bob Goff.
Hey, everybody. I hope you're doing terrific. Boy, we have all been through a lot, but we want you to stay encouraged. And no better friend than Scott Sauls to encourage us.
It's perfect timing. As everybody knows, and we say this every week, the world is upside down, not just the pandemic, economic collapse, but this extreme polarization, this breakdown of meaningful dialogue between folks. Like we're just throwing shots at each other, not listening. And so tell me about Scott, how you know each other and just the kind of guy that he is.
Scott is just a wise, kind voice in my life. And I really want all of you to be exposed at least to the people that are big influences in my life. The reason Scott, among many, is that he's not only a knowledgeable guy, and he is all of that, but he's a peacemaker. He's so well-spoken in what he has to say as he articulates ideas. And I've seen him in difficult circumstances just bring peace into the room. You know when somebody walks in the room and everybody just takes it down about 4 notches? Not that guy.
Good. Well, we need a lot of Scott, not just this week, but for the next few months, it seems like. So buckle up, everybody. Listen in on a conversation between Bob Goff and Scott Sauls.
Scott, thanks a million for jumping on the podcast with me.
It's great to be with you, Bob.
Everybody else can't see you, but I'm looking at you sitting in a car, evidently in Georgia somewhere. Tell me how you doing.
I'm doing well. I'm visiting my father in Georgia. He's going through a few things. I'm just here to help him out. But like I told you before we went live here, I'm sitting under a tree in the Walmart parking lot, which I'm told is the best connection in all of Statesboro, Georgia.
That's awesome. Isn't it crazy how like the word gets out about the places to go? Well, one of the things that you and I started a friendship years ago, when I think I was coming through Tennessee and you heard I was going to be there and you invited me over to the house. Do you remember that?
Oh, we remember it vividly.
Yeah, it was just so kind of you. I felt like this, sojourner, and you just threw the front door open, and we just had the best evening together. You have this inviting spirit, and I think it's like the backdrop and a contrast with so much controversy that is in the air. That was just such a beautiful act of hospitality for no agenda other than say, let's be friends. And we've just decided we'd be friends ever since then. How do we navigate that stuff? How do we navigate the difficulties of the time? Because you're just like such a wise voice in that.
Well, I don't know about that, but I do have, Bob, a very similar passion and desire and vision as yours to see love win the day. I'm a believer that both love and kindness, as well as negativity and cynicism, are all contagious. And so, maybe tie that to the season we're in right now, where we're all running for our lives from this little microscopic virus, right? And there's also a positive version of contagious. And in a climate where everybody seems to be at each other's throats, suspicious of each other, afraid of what's going to be said about them in public. They talk about cancel culture and all of those things. I think I'd like to be at least a small part of a kindness movement. If anybody else is interested in that, I want to be part of that too.
Oh man, I'm in. One of the things that I think people they don't set out to be difficult. It just happens a little bit at a time, so they don't realize that they've actually become difficult over time. And I think when I reflect on it, it's that we get distracted. We get distracted from who we used to be when we were less difficult. We get distracted by the pressures, by the wounds of the day, by whatever, shiny thing that day. And you become distracted and passionate about stuff that isn't going to last as long. It's not that it's unimportant. It's just that you move it to the top. It needs to be on the top of your list because it's at the top of my list. And I've tried to find a way to control the distractions. You can actually use those. Oh, I've got a great example. I don't know if you remember, it was years ago. I came to your church and there was a bunch of young people there. And I knew I needed to be in downtown Nashville speaking at something like 15 minutes after I said the last word there. So I needed to get out. So the last thing I did, this kind of reading the room, I brought 2 huge confetti cannons with me. I shot them into the air and everybody was looking at the confetti and I slipped out. So take me from, if you agree with the premise that we're not like just difficult, we're distracted. And so it reads as difficult. We get distracted and a little testy about things. What's your take on that?
I mean, I think you're definitely on to something, Bob. I think there are a lot of factors, but distraction, it can be a huge one. We allow ourselves to get distracted by, the loudest voices, and oftentimes the loudest voices are maybe the ones that make things a little bit worse rather than a little bit better. And we're also distracted by our own hurts and our own struggles and challenges. That I love how the movie Wonder ends with the quote, "Be kind, because every person you meet is fighting a hard and hidden battle." And I think part of that message was, you've got this little kid in the story named Augie who, just gets bullied and made fun of and treated badly by his classmates. And over the course of the movie finds out that the jocks and the cheerleaders and the bullies and the mean girls are struggling just as much as he is. But their struggle just manifests through meanness in the way that his struggle manifests through trying to avoid people. We're all scared, I think, and that oftentimes will affect the way we respond. And I think sometimes when we go on offense, it really is just a way of playing defense, because we're afraid on the inside.
I'm a guy that uses a lot of metaphors. Like I say, it's kind of like this, it's kind of like that. And I can tell when I've totally lost them in the metaphor. They're like as Finkter says, what? Like, I just don't know what I just said. I don't even know what I just said. But one of the things that we can do is we can lose the people. If you're reading the room, you can tell when you're up in front on Sundays, like you can tell when you've lost the room. People are looking at their watch and they're doing other things. I wonder if we could just be more interested in other people than we were in our thoughts about that, to say, I would love to walk away from a few minutes with Scott Sauls knowing more about the guy, Scott Sauls, like caring that you're down there with your dad. And like thinking about all the things that weren't said, like how that would ache to probably, I'm just assuming that he would be longer in years than you by a bunch, and that would face all kinds of difficulties. It would make me more compassionate with what you'd say than if I was just reacting your opinion about conflict. I'd just go like, wow, here's a guy who drove to a tree in a Walmart parking store just because we're friends. So we'd have a good connection because he's a nice guy. That would actually, if we could just be situationally aware, it would help. Give us some other pointers. How do we become like kinder? How do we have gentler answers to the questions that are asked?
Well, I appreciate that segue, Bob. And I think that, first of all, gentleness has been something I've been thinking a lot about. If you're a Bible person, I'm a Bible person, gentleness is listed as one of the fruit of the Spirit. And so I think it's something that we all want to aspire to. What drives it, I think, is, in my opinion, in I guess the case that I like to make around how we become gentle is that we first experience it. We experience it from God. We experience it from other people. We experience it maybe through somebody's forgiveness. If we've gotten distracted, Bob, and we've, maybe said something we regret or done something we regret, and we experience kindness and forgiveness and grace from whoever it was that we might have lashed out at. I think that can have an effect because, again, I think these postures and attitudes are contagious and they rub off. They spread. And So I think being in an environment where we can experience it. A great example is Mr. Rogers, right? He's so popular now.
Yeah.
Maybe because he's so rare in this climate, and yet how the rareness of how kind and gentle he is, and that his 3 favorite words in the world were "I like you." I think we're so drawn to that, and almost to the point where there seems to be a bit of a movement, back in that direction of not only intrigue with this guy, but what made him the way he was, and how can I get in on that? I think the popularity of the movies about him speak for themselves.
Yeah. I think sometimes it's a desire to be understood. I want you, Scott, to understand me. I think if you didn't understand a sentence that I said, I would still feel understood because we're friends and we've got some history together. And so the desire to be understood for me doesn't linger sentence by sentence. We are not figuring out this friendship a sentence at a time. Yet when you have people that don't have history with each other, they're figuring out their relationship a word at a time. And so knowing the reality of that, I'd just be really picky about the words that you use, because we have years, somebody else has moments, and to say, like, if they're going to figure out whether I'm friend or foe, whether I'm a safe person or the enemy in the next few minutes, I'm not trying to curry people's favor. I just want them to know that they're welcome near me, even when they're flat wrong.
Well, one thing that you did once, Bob, and I don't know if you remember us even having this conversation, but I think you had just, gotten insulted on Twitter or something by somebody you'd never met. And you just kind of casually told Patty and me that whenever that happens, what you like to do is hit on their feed and actually be proactive about getting to know a little bit about them and their story. And a lot of times you'll discover, hey, this is a hurting person. Hey, they've gone through some stuff. And then I think you said you try to find their address so you can send them a cake pop or something. I've always wondered what the cake pop is like when it arrives in the mailbox by the time it gets there. But I just thought, what a remarkable and beautiful and true and right way to respond. And the book you mentioned a minute ago is based upon the proverb in Proverbs 15:1, where it says, "A gentle answer turns away wrath." And I think your kind of your Twitter practice and the way that you do that in your life of you're always looking for what makes this person tick, what's their story, what's behind that, is in many ways step one to maybe helping somebody who didn't particularly, say a very nice thing about you on Twitter become an admirer. Not that that's your goal. Your goal is love, and somebody's admiration is an outcome or a byproduct of that. But I just thought that was a remarkable response. When most of us we'll get defensive or we'll just hit delete or block, but you're trying to get to know people all the time like that, which we're really touched by that.
Well, I don't always get it right, but I think what I know how confused I get about things, and I would imagine I'm not the only guy that gets confused about things. And what's crazy about people that are confused, sometimes just on how they process things, they're trying to understand something they don't understand, and they're making it by statements as if they understand it. And really, they're just driving around the block to say, is that really what I believe? But it comes out as very authoritative, very, pushy at one end, but they're really just trying to understand stuff that neither of us understand. And so I'm not saying that we just get pushed around on that, but I think we can control the conversation a little bit more than we do. Just because if somebody wants to talk about how they've been out of shape about, whatever, insert topic here. Well, I actually care that there's 1 million people starving right now in Yemen. That doesn't make that a better issue. It's just a different one. And so I don't want to feel like I need to engage somebody on theirs. I think if we could just be delighting that we're on a path together without trying to figure out who's ahead and who's behind, just say we're together on this path, and I just hope there's another chance to visit along the way. I don't want to make a bunch of enemies. Because that makes me feel so late. It was a conflict for me. It'd be interesting in your career track as a pastor. I was a lawyer, so everybody thought I was a jerk. Like, you must be a jerk if you're a lawyer. And it's actually not true. Many of the lawyers I know, they aren't jerks at all. They're advocates. They're delightful people. Yet they get what's called, my kids called the lawyer voice. And my kids would say when there was somebody in the grill of one of my friends, they'd like, oh no, lawyer voice. And what I've been trying to do is control my lawyer voice because I know what that sounds like. And it actually isn't very nurturing. And I don't need to raise my voice to have the lawyer voice, but it just says, oh, you and I have a problem now. And I just don't feel like I want to be Jesus's lawyer. I don't want to be somebody else's lawyer. I just want to be a participant in this. How do you navigate that from the front of a church? It seems like everybody, I don't think a lot of people have opinions about me. I'm like the guy with balloons, but they'll have opinions about you. Like they'll say, well, what's your position on insert here? Difficult theological question. Gay, straight, Buddhist, Baptist, like whatever.
Yeah. I mean, those sort of what's your opinion, what's your view on questions, usually the best, at least first answer to that is, well, let's talk about who you think Jesus is and who I think Jesus is. And then we'll have those other conversations maybe after that, because I think we need to understand that first. Because, if you take your subject, insert whatever subject it is of the ones you just mentioned, and you run it through Christ, that means you're running it through the grid of love. You're running it through the grid of someone who was willing to take it on the chin in order to protect others. You run it through the grid of one who, gave his life to heal the world. And that just changes, at least it changes my perspective on every conversation. If that can be the first step of running it through the one that at least I believe, created the universe, and knows how the universe is supposed to run, and it's supposed to run through those things that defined his life. And so, you take any of the subjects you just mentioned and run it through that grid, I think you're going to have a really exciting conversation.
What if you said to somebody, what's one thing we have in common? I know one thing you and I had in common. You invited me. We've both sat on your couch. I think that's awesome. So find like one thing in common, and then we can just go have the conversation. But that idea that it's Philippians 2:20, to take a genuine interest in the people around you and to say, so before we jump into all the other stuff, let's find one thing we have in common. And then we go, I'm not going for lowest common denominator because true is true is true. It's just that we're always confused about truth. And I just want to be really humble because eternity is a long time. And I think it's probably going to take that long for us to unlearn some of the things we thought we had nailed.
So I can give a very real-time example of what you just said about, starting with what we have in common. Last year, I've been introduced to a handful of Muslim leaders around the country. And one of them happens to live right down the street, and we're just this morning we're emailing about getting together, first and foremost for the purposes of getting to know one another and of understanding one another and one another's unique experiences, backgrounds, histories, struggles, etc. Because even if you have, let's say, faith traditions or philosophies or ideologies or political stances that are different, every single person shares the fact that you're a human being, which means at the baseline, you have dignity and worth and value, and you deserve to be taken seriously, and you deserve to be listened to. And what I've found in a climate where oftentimes the narrative about Muslims goes straight to the extremists, right? And yet every Muslim person I've met so far is one of the more lovely people that I've met, kind, humble, and so on. And And it's gotten me to thinking, what if people, they find out that I'm a Christian, which is what I am. And they said, although that must make you like those guys in the KKK, because those guys in the KKK claimed, that they were Christian. None of us wants to be reduced to a certain caricature, especially without the opportunity of being known. And when you have the opportunity to be known, then you have the opportunity for some really fruitful conversations, and even a climate to disagree on things that are important to you as friends, not as enemies.
One of the things that I have a friend that comes to mind that lives out near you and your friend as well. And when this friend runs, she looks for pieces of wood that look like slingshots. And anytime she sees a wood with a little notch in it, she'll take a picture of that. And so just because we're friends, when I see a piece of wood that looks like a slingshot, I see a tree that has two branches that go up in a V, I think just really fondly, just go like, oh, I hope everything's going great there. And I think if we go with these things, these simple things to ask somebody that might be a leader of a country, what is it that you want to be known for? Like, what do you want to be remembered for? And to have those moments, but to not fill them with all the discussions that become the distractions. There's a guy who's actually the minister of defense of this entire country we're not getting along with. And he was leaning up against a tree. I didn't know who he was. He was just a guy on a tree. I was with somebody else. And when we walked by, he offered me a kumquat. He said, "You want one of these?" I'm like, awesome. I didn't know.
I'm embarrassed to ask you what a kumquat is.
Yeah. It's like a cake pop, but good for you. But one of the things he offered me this, when I see him again, when he sees me, we'll be talking about the kumquat. We won't be talking about very important, larger issues, but that moment of connection. And I think your book, A Gentle Answer, is really speaking to those issues. If you were to summarize the book, how would you summarize some of the steps that we can take? Like, it starts with self-awareness, but what are some of the pointers you can give us? I know we're all learning on this thing.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, and this is how the book starts, is the more we can see our own selves and our lives in light of how God sees us and our own lives, especially through what Jesus came to do, the more positioned we will be to become hard to offend and slow to be offensive. Because if I'm a recipient, if I'm a beneficiary of that kind of audacious love, and I'm aware of it, and I'm living in awareness of that, then it has to affect the way that I look at the world and other people. And then the rest of the book is just about fleshing that out. And it's not so much steps as it is a state of mind, a posture of starting every day with receiving love, and then moving out into the world, and all of the conflict that exists in the world as what St. Francis called an instrument of peace. He said, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there's injury, let me sow pardon. Where there is darkness, let me sow light, and so on. And so the whole message of the book is built around first becoming at peace because of how loved we are, and then becoming instruments of peace in the places where we live, work, play, post things on social media, whatever it is that we have an opportunity to do to send something contagious out into the world. My hope is that at least the book will help. It'll be a small part of moving the needle in ways that your work is a big part of moving the needle, Bob, to leave the world a little bit better than we found it, through love and kindness and grace and gentleness.
Let's say you're listening to this and you pulled over. Maybe there's a couple things Scott said that have pinged you. What I want to do is turn to one last difficult issue, which is the people that are just toxic to you. They're just bad for you. You know that you are not a better version of you when they're around, and I agree with everything that's been said, and maybe you found yourself nodding that we should be kinder. And then there's somebody that is just not good for you to be around. It might be for a season, it might be forever. But Scott, how do we deal with that for a person that's just not good to be around you? They are, God redeems everything, but the way they are doing life is causing so much hurt in your life that you need to respond in some way.
Well, usually in my world, behind that question is, what do I do with somebody who's injured me and the wound is still open? And it could be a deep injury, a severe injury, a long-standing one, a one-time injury, but it's still out there and the wound is still open. And I guess the simple, and I hope it's not too simplistic, but the simple, short answer is that trust and forgiveness are two very different things. And sometimes, a lot of times, they don't go together, at least not immediately. Forgiveness is something that we do not only to relieve the other person of the burden of guilt and shame and retaliation, but it's also something we do for our own hearts, because bitterness, when we hold on to it, Andy Stanley once said, it's like clinging on to a hot, fiery coal, and the person that we're hurting most is ourselves. But that's heart work. That's the challenging, difficult heart work. Get a great counselor. Surround yourself with a couple of friends who really get you and who can keep a good confidence, and work through those things over time. And realize that you don't have to trust somebody for a long time or even ever, especially if they never come around and own what they've done. And the more severe the injury, the more distance you probably ought to keep, especially if there's no sign of remorse or humbling or sorrow for what the person's done.
Yeah, so I just, because we want to keep it super real, there's somebody that, if you're listening, that maybe has wounded you really bad. They messed up what they did, and they have never either fessed up or got real with it. And I don't think we need to hurt ourselves, damage ourselves more. I think what we need to do is understand it. Understand why we felt it. You already know what it feels like. But then to start saying, for your own self-care, what's a pathway out? And it won't be a number of steps. It'll be more of an on-ramp to healing for you. You'll just craft a strategy to say this will work. And as you were saying, Scott, to include a counselor. I know our friend out at Onsite, Miles Adcox, does such a great job. He says oftentimes, like, our minds can't heal what they don't see. And so if we're willing to see it, but then you don't need to camp out there. You just need to come up with a strategy, wrap that with a strategy. And the strategy might be more love and acceptance elsewhere as you're trying to figure out this difficult one, and don't beat yourself up more. Well, the book is a gentle answer. One thing that you don't know, Scott, before I met you, somebody said, there's this great book that I wrote, and it had dots all over the front of that. What was that one that you wrote before?
Befriend.
Oh, it was so good.
My wife says it looks like the cover of the Very Hungry Caterpillar that the children.
Oh, yeah. They introduced me to you by saying, the only book I like way better than yours, Bob, is this one. You know who said it? My friend that picks up those crosses, slingshots.
They must have been smoking something to say that.
If you haven't had a chance to read some of Scott's book, he is a friend. He is one of a small group of people whose voices I trust. I consider him, in addition to a friend, he is my pastor. He's a guy that has a lot to say. And so if you do have a chance, this isn't a push for his book. If you're dealing with some of these questions about how to engage people who are difficult, this might be among the things that'll be thought-provoking for you to move along the way. Scott, thank you so much. Blessings on you, your dad, speedy healing to him. And I just hope God guards your heart in the middle of that. I know you're touching a lot of lives, buddy.
Thanks, Bob. Love you, buddy.
You know you've got dreams hidden down deep inside your heart. And maybe you didn't have what you felt like was the confidence to pursue them. Maybe you feel like you don't have the permission, or maybe you just don't know how to chase them, how to organize your life around your big ambitions. Well, after a long wait, Bob's new book is now available. It's the Dream Big book, and you can pick it up today. You can read it like an old-fashioned book. You can also listen to it. Go to thedreambigbook.com and order your copy today. Okay, Bob, I'm just curious. You're a little bit older than me by a few months. Have you seen a time? Can you remember a time in our country, in our worlds like this that's so polarized?
I'm still back on that older than me by a couple. Are you looking at the screen? I feel like
try to slip that in there.
But you know what? Each season of life has its own particular challenges, and while this one is really readily apparent, it's on our minds. We talk about global kinds of issues. The things that we're talking about aren't just regional or citywide. We're talking about how this is rushed across the earth. What a great time to have a worldwide community of friends where we can speak honestly with one another. We can say some difficult truths, but we can also say them with the context of love. I know while you and I could see differently on things, I just know that you love me. And even if I was flat wrong, I know that you wouldn't be going anywhere. And that kind of staying power in a friendship is something that we can really give to each other, to say, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here to learn, but boy, I'm not going to let the circumstances push me around. I'm not going to let that drive a wedge in between me and you. And what we want to do is just continue to practice that. And I'll tell you, I'm not the guy that is always mastering that, but I have that in mind every single day.
Well, a couple things stuck out from the conversation. Scott said, I'd like to be a small part of the kindness movement. And then you built on that and talked about how you need to be picky with the words that you use, because there's so much misunderstanding, misinterpreting of each other. So as you're listening to this, what's something you could do for somebody that maybe you're feeling a little divided against, or you've had some misunderstanding? What's some act of kindness that you can do that maybe doesn't involve words? Like a Bob's cake pop, something like that.
I'll tell you, one of the things that we're all wearing face masks, and if you're not, you should be. I love you. Yeah. I'm not going anywhere, but get with the program. But I got a face mask that says "Be kind." The reason that I wear it isn't because I think it's a novel idea. I just can't have mean words coming out from behind the mask that says "Be kind." And seeing that juxtaposition. Just say so you go get a face mask if you're a little bit on edge with everybody. So say this is a kind person. You will not say mean things. It's crazy. It just brings to mind this duplicitous nature that we all have, that we say one thing, that we do another thing. And Paul had it, I've got it. But one of these reminders to remind yourself about who you want to be, what role you want to play in the really difficult issues of the time.
And maybe pick up one of those masks and send it to that Facebook friend of yours that just can't help themselves. And while you're doing it, pick up Scott's new book. It's called A Gentle Answer, Our Secret Weapon in an Age of Us Against Them, and practice kindness. Bob, thanks for being an example of kindness to me. And we really hope that kindness spreads now more than ever.
Here's the great part. Everybody, as you sign off, you get a chance every day to just renew this thing. Even if you blew it yesterday, today you're back up at the plate. And so dig a little bit deeper and find those kinder words to express a really important idea. Hey, we'll see you guys next week.